She kissed her employee, right there in her office, on her desk. Months of restraint shattered in seconds. Papers scattered around them, his hands in her hair, her heart racing faster than it had in years. But the last time she mixed love and work, it destroyed her. It destroyed everything. This is the story of a woman they called the Ice Queen, 39 years old, CEO of one of Seoul's most powerful architecture firms. She built an empire from nothing, trusted no one, loved no one, until he walked into her office. He was younger, brilliant, and he saw through every wall she'd built. But love stories that start in corner offices rarely end well. Before we begin, if you love stories that make you feel something real, stories about love, betrayal, hit that like button right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happens next. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's begin. Seo-jin didn't believe in second chances. Not in love, not after what her ex-husband had done. But in business, she'd built her entire empire on a second chance, her own. When she walked away from her ex-husband's architecture firm 5 years ago, people whispered that she would fail within months. They said a woman couldn't run a major architecture company alone. They were wrong. At 39 years old, Seo-jin was now the CEO of Seo-jin Architecture, one of Seoul's most respected firms. She was known for 3 things: impeccable designs, impossible standards, and an ice-cold demeanor that made even senior architects nervous. She arrived at the office every morning at 6 a.m., left after everyone else, and never, ever mixed business with pleasure. Her morning routine was always the same: review projects, check timelines, make notes. Everything had its place. Everything was controlled. But control, as she would soon learn, was an illusion. Min-jun was hired on a Tuesday in March. He was 31 years old, graduated top of his class from Seoul National University, and had spent 5 years at a prestigious firm in New York before returning to Korea. His portfolio was impressive. During the interview, Seo-jin asked technical questions, challenged his design choices, and watched how he defended his work. He was confident without being arrogant, creative without being impractical. After 30 minutes, she stood up, extended her hand, and said simply, "Welcome to the team. Don't disappoint me." He replied, "I won't." As Min-jun settled into his new role, Do-yeon, Seo-jin's business partner and best friend, noticed the way he sometimes glanced towards Seo-jin's office. She told him with a knowing smile, "Don't even think about it." He asked what she meant. Do-yeon just laughed and said, "You're terrible at hiding what you're thinking." But he wasn't thinking anything. Not yet. He simply noticed her. The way you notice a perfectly designed building. Striking, intentional, built to last. For the first few months, they were simply colleagues. Professional. Distant. Seo-jin was demanding, often sending back his designs with pages of notes and revisions. But Min-jun never complained. He would take her feedback, work late into the night, and return with something better. Slowly, imperceptibly, she began to trust his judgment. He would stay late when she stayed late. Started bringing coffee without being asked, prepared exactly how she liked it, though she'd never told him. Their first major collaboration came 3 months after he started. A potential client wanted to build a luxury residential complex in Gangnam. It was a $50 million project, and the client was notoriously difficult. During the pitch meeting, Min-jun presented the initial designs while Seo-jin handled the business negotiations. They worked like a well-oiled machine, but halfway through, the client interrupted. He said the design was too modern, too cold, not what he wanted at all. The room went silent. Min-jun didn't panic. Instead, he calmly pulled up alternative mock-ups he'd prepared. He spoke with passion about honoring Seoul's architectural heritage while embracing its future. His conviction was undeniable. Seo-jin watched him work the room and felt something unexpected. Pride. When the client looked uncertain, she stepped in seamlessly, backing up Min-jun's vision with market data and projected returns. By the end of the meeting, they'd won the contract. 6 months after Min-jun started, the company won a major award. Everyone went out to celebrate at an upscale restaurant in Itaewon. It was rare to see Seo-jin outside the office, even rarer to see her relaxed. But that night, after 2 glasses of wine, she laughed at Do-yeon's impression of a difficult client, and the sound filled the entire table. Min-jun, sitting across from her, felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't the wine. It wasn't the celebration. It was seeing her like this. Guard down, genuinely happy, her smile reaching her eyes for once. In that moment, he knew. He was in love with her. The realization hit him like a freight train. The next morning, he sat at his desk unable to focus, staring at his untouched coffee. Do-yeon walked by and immediately noticed something was wrong. She asked if he was okay, saying he looked like he'd seen a ghost. He ran his hand through his hair and admitted he thought he'd made a mistake. When Do-yeon asked what kind of mistake, he looked up at her and said quietly, "The kind I can't take back." Do-yeon understood immediately. She sat on the edge of his desk and asked what he planned to do about it. Min-jun shook his head and said he didn't know. Do-yeon was quiet for a moment, then warned him, "She's not ready, Min-jun. I don't know if she'll ever be ready." But Min-jun had never been the type to give up on something he wanted. And he wanted her. Min-jun didn't tell Seo-jin about his feelings. Not yet. Instead, he showed her in small, careful ways. 2 weeks later, one of their biggest projects hit a major crisis. The construction company had made errors in the foundation, and the client was threatening to pull out of the contract entirely. It was 11 p.m. on a Friday, and the office was empty except for Seo-jin. She sat in her office, surrounded by blueprints and revision notes, her head in her hands, the weight of potential failure pressing down on her shoulders. Min-jun had gone home hours earlier, but something made him turn his car around. Some instinct told him she'd still be there, still fighting. When he walked back into the office and found her still there, she looked up surprised. She asked what he was doing back. He simply said, "I had a feeling you'd still be here. Let me help." She started to protest, saying he should go home, but he was already rolling up his sleeves and pulling up the digital files. They worked side by side for hours, rebuilding the structural plans, finding creative solutions to the construction errors. Their shoulders nearly touched as they leaned over the same blueprints. The air between them felt charged, electric. At one point, they both reached for the same pencil. Their hands touched. The contact lasted only a second, but electricity shot through both of them. Seo-jin pulled her hand back quickly and cleared her throat, pretending to study the blueprints more closely. But her heart was racing. By 4 a.m., they'd solved the problem. Seo-jin leaned back in her chair, exhausted but relieved. She looked at Min-jun and said sincerely, "Thank you. I couldn't have done this alone." Min-jun met her eyes and replied softly, "You could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." Something passed between them in that moment. Seo-jin felt it, that pull, that warmth, that danger. Over the next few weeks, Min-jun's attention towards Seo-jin became more noticeable to everyone in the office. He started bringing her lunch on days when she worked through meals. He would stay late whenever she stayed late, always with an excuse about finishing his own work. He remembered small details, how she took her tea, which temperature she preferred the office. The office started to notice. Whispers began. Knowing glances were exchanged in the break room. Ha-young, a junior architect who'd had a crush on Min-jun since he started, noticed everything. One afternoon, she tried to make her move. She approached his desk with 2 coffees and a bright smile, saying she'd bought an extra and thought he might want one. Min-jun politely declined, saying he'd already had his coffee. Undeterred, Ha-young suggested they grab lunch together. Min-jun looked up from his computer and said gently but firmly, "Ha-young, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested. I'm focused on someone else." Ha-young's smile faltered. She walked away, hurt and embarrassed. Seo-jin knew. Of course she knew. She'd spent 15 years reading people, negotiating deals, spotting subtext. She saw the way Min-jun looked at her, felt the charge in the air when they worked together, noticed how he always seemed to be exactly where she needed him. and it terrified her. One evening, Do-yeon stayed back after everyone left and found Seo-jin still at her desk, staring blankly at her computer screen. Do-yeon closed the office door and said, "We need to talk." Seo-jin asked about what, but Do-yeon gave her a look that said she wasn't playing games. She sat down and asked directly why Seo-jin was avoiding Min-jun. Seo-jin tried to deny it, saying she wasn't avoiding anyone, but Do-yeon cut her off. She said she'd known Seo-jin for 15 years and could read her like a book. She asked what was really going on. Seo-jin was quiet for a long moment, then finally admitted quietly, "He's a good employee. That's all." Do-yeon leaned forward and asked, "And if he's more than that?" Seo-jin's jaw tightened. She said firmly, "He's not. He can't be." Do-yeon asked why not. Seo-jin stood up and walked to the window, arms crossed protectively. She said there were 1,000 reasons why. He worked for her, the age difference, her daughter, her past, the scandal it would cause. Do-yeon listened to all of it, then said simply, "Those are all excuses. What's the real reason?" Seo-jin's voice was barely a whisper when she replied, "Because I can't survive it again. If I let myself feel something and it ends like it did with Tae-hyun, I won't come back from it a second time." The following week, Seoul was hit with heavy rain. The office emptied early as people rushed home before the weather got worse. But Seo-jin stayed, as always, working on a proposal that was due the next day. By the time she finished, it was past 8 p.m., and the rain was coming down in sheets. She packed up her things and headed to the elevator. When she reached the building entrance, she realized she'd left her umbrella at home. She stood there, debating whether to just run to her car, when a voice behind her said, "You'll get soaked." She turned to find Min-jun standing there with an umbrella. He offered to walk her to her car. She told him she'd be fine, but he ignored her protest and opened the umbrella, gesturing for her to come closer. They walked to the parking garage together under one umbrella, shoulders touching, neither speaking. The sound of rain was deafening, the warmth of his body so close to hers as overwhelming. When they reached her car, they stood there for a moment, both getting wet despite the umbrella. Seo-jin looked up at him, rain misting around them, and said, "You should go. You'll catch a cold." Min-jun smiled, rain dripping down his face, and replied, "Worth it." Then he handed her the umbrella and started to walk away into the rain. Seo-jin called his name. He turned back. She wanted to say something. "Thank you, be careful," anything. But the words stuck in her throat. Finally, she just said, "Use the umbrella. I can run to my car." Min-jun shook his head and said, "Keep it. I like the rain." Then he walked away, leaving her standing there holding his umbrella. That night, Seo-jin lay in bed unable to sleep. She kept replaying the moment. The way he'd looked at her in the rain, the gentle smile, the selfless gesture. She told herself it didn't mean anything. But she was lying, and she knew it. 3 days after the rainstorm, the company won another major project, a cultural center in Busan. The office celebrated with champagne and toasts. Everyone was in high spirits. For once, even Seo-jin allowed herself to smile, to enjoy the moment. After an hour, people started heading home. Min-jun helped clean up the conference room, gathering empty glasses and paper plates. Seo-jin was doing the same. They worked in comfortable silence until everyone else had left. Finally, Min-jun set down the glasses he was holding and said, "Can I ask you something?" Seo-jin, not looking up from what she was doing, replied, "What?" He asked directly, "Are you avoiding me?" Seo-jin froze for just a second, then continued cleaning and said, "No, I've just been busy." Min-jun shook his head and said, "You're always busy. That's not what I mean. You've been pulling away. Ever since that night in the rain. If I've made you uncomfortable, just tell me. I'll stop." Seo-jin finally looked at him and asked quietly, "Stop what?" Min-jun held her gaze and said simply, "Caring about you." The air between them went still. Seo-jin felt like she couldn't breathe. She said, her voice shaking slightly, "You can't care about me." Min-jun replied, "Too late." 3 days later, both Seo-jin and Min-jun were working late on a crucial deadline for a client presentation. It was past 11 p.m., and the office was completely empty except for them. Papers were spread across Seo-jin's desk, empty coffee cups scattered around. The only light came from her desk lamp and computer screen. The city glowed beyond the windows, but inside, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Seo-jin stretched, exhausted, and said they were almost done. Min-jun looked up from his laptop and suggested she go home, saying he could finish the rest. Seo-jin shook her head and replied, "I don't leave my team to work alone." Min-jun closed his laptop and stood up. He walked to her desk, his voice quiet but intense. "I'm not just your team." Seo-jin froze. She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "What?" Min-jun looked directly at her and said, "You know what I mean." Seo-jin stood abruptly and said, "Min-jun, don't." But he interrupted, "Don't what? Don't tell you that I think about you constantly, that I admire everything about you, that every day I come to work hopping to see you smile, even once, that I—" Seo-jin cut him off sharply. "Stop." She backed away from her desk, creating distance between them. Min-jun didn't follow, but he didn't back down either. He asked, "Why?" Seo-jin said desperately, "Because this can't happen." He asked again, "Why not?" And then Seo-jin said everything she'd been holding in, every reason she'd repeated to herself over and over. Her words came fast, urgent, desperate. "You work for me, I'm your boss. Do you understand how that looks?" She paced now, agitated. "I'm 8 years older than you. People will say I'm taking advantage, that I'm pathetic, that I'm having some kind of midlife crisis." She kept going, voice rising. "I have a daughter, baggage, a failed marriage, a bitter ex-husband who will use this against me." She turned to face him, her voice breaking slightly. "People will talk. They'll say I'm unprofessional, that I can't separate business from personal feelings. Our clients won't take us seriously. The board will question my judgment." She was breathing hard now. "This could ruin everything I've spent 5 years building, everything I sacrificed my marriage, my peace, my relationship with my daughter to create. I can't. I won't risk it." She finally stopped, breathing hard, waiting for him to back down to see reason to walk away. Instead, Min-jun smiled, not mockingly but gently, warmly. He asked, "Are you done?" Seo-jin said, "I'm serious." Then he addressed every single one of her concerns. His voice was calm, steady, certain. "You're my boss, that's true, but I don't report to you because I have to. I'd follow you anywhere with or without a paycheck, because you're brilliant, because you inspire me, because working beside you is the best part of my day." He took a step closer. 8 years? I'll be 40 when you're 48. I'll be 50 when you're 58. I'll be 65 when you're 73. Does math suddenly start mattering at some specific age? Because I don't see it. Another step. "You have a daughter. I think that's wonderful. If she's anything like you, she's probably incredible, strong, smart, and I'd be honored to meet her, if you'd let me." His voice softened. "You call it baggage. I call it a life lived. I don't want someone who's never been hurt, who's never made mistakes, who's never had to rebuild from the ground up. I want someone who chose to heal, who chose to keep going, who chose to become even stronger. I want you." He was close now, close enough that Seo-jin could feel the warmth radiating from him. He continued, his voice gentle but firm. "People will talk, they already do. They talked when you left Taehyun's firm. They said you'd fail. They talked when you started your own company. They said you'd be bankrupt in 6 months. They talked when you won your first major contract. They found something to criticize. Let them talk. I don't build my life around cowards' opinions. Our clients care about results. We deliver. That won't change just because we're together. If anything, we'll be even better, because we already work perfectly together. You know we do." He paused, then said the words that broke through every wall she'd built. "And as for ruining what you've built, Seo-jin, I'm not here to tear anything down. I'm not Taehyun, your WX husband. I'm not here to take from you. I'm here to build something with you, if you'll let me." Seo-jin had no more reasons, no more walls, no more defenses. Just him, standing in front of her, seeing through every excuse to the fear underneath. Her voice was barely a whisper when she said, "This is a bad idea." Minjun replied softly, "Probably." She said, "We'll regret this." He said, "I doubt it." Then Seojin kissed him. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was 8 months of restraint shattering all at once. It was every stolen glance, every brushed hand, every moment of wanting and not allowing herself to want. Minjun responded immediately, his hands coming up to cup her face as he kissed her back with equal intensity. She pulled him closer, fingers tangling in his hair. He lifted her onto the desk, papers scattering to the floor, neither of them caring. Her legs wrapped around his waist as the kiss deepened. His hands moved from her face to her waist, then to her back, pulling her even closer. They broke apart just long enough to breathe before diving back in. His lips moved to her neck and she gasped, head falling back. Her hands were everywhere. His shoulders, his chest, his hair. His hands started to roam, and she arched into his touch. The intensity kept building. They were approaching a point of no return, both of them aware of it, neither wanting to stop. But then, through the haze of want, reality crashed back in. Seojin suddenly pushed gently against his chest, breathless. She said, "Wait, wait." Minjun stopped immediately, pulling back, his hands dropping from her body. He asked, concerned, "Are you okay?" Seojin was flushed, her blouse disheveled, her breathing uneven. She slid off the desk and said, I need to go home." Minjun said her name, but she was already grabbing her bag, not meeting his eyes. She said, "I need to think. I can't think when we're." She practically ran out of the office, leaving Minjun standing there alone, heart still racing. He touched his lips and said to the empty room, "Well, that happened." The next morning, Seojin arrived at the office at 5:30 a.m., a full hour earlier than usual. She buried herself in work, responding to emails, reviewing proposals, anything to keep her mind occupied and away from thoughts of the night before. Away from the memory of his hands on her waist, his lips on hers, the way her body had responded to his touch. Throughout the morning, Seojin avoided Minjun completely. When she saw him walking toward her office, she suddenly remembered an urgent call she needed to make. When he waited by the elevator hopping to catch her, she took the stairs. During the team meeting at 11, she addressed everyone in the room except him. Minjun noticed everything, every avoidance, every dodge, every time she looked away when their eyes met. By lunchtime, he tried a direct approach. He sent her an email with the subject line, "Can we talk?" Her response came 30 seconds later. "Busy, later." Later never came. What neither of them knew was that Ha-young had been working late that night too. She'd left something at her desk and came back to get it. When she reached their floor, she heard voices. Curious, she'd approached quietly. And through the glass wall of Seojin's office, she'd seen them. Seen the kiss, seen everything. Ha-young couldn't keep it to herself. She told her friend Jaisu from accounting, swearing her to secrecy. Jaisu told 2 other people. By the end of the week, half the office knew. By the end of the following week, everyone knew. People would stop talking when Seojin or Minjun walked by. Conversations would hush in the break room. Some people were supportive, others judgmental. The age gap was discussed endlessly. People said Minjun was using Seojin to advance his career. They said Seojin was having a midlife crisis. They said it would end in disaster. By 5 p.m., Minjun had had enough. He walked straight into Seojin's office and closed the door behind him. Seojin, not looking up from her computer, said, "I'm busy." Minjun replied, "You've been busy all day, specifically busy avoiding me." Seojin said, "I'm not avoiding." But Minjun cut her off. "Seojin, look at me." She kept her eyes on her screen. Minjun walked to her desk and gently closed her laptop. He said quietly, "Last night, did I misread what happened?" Seojin finally looked up at him. Her voice was cold, professional. She said, "It was a mistake." Minjun shook his head. It didn't feel like a mistake. Seojin stood up, putting the desk between them like a barrier. She said firmly, "It can't happen again." Minjun asked, "Why?" Seojin's voice rose slightly. "All the reasons I gave you last night." Min-jun interrupted. All the reasons I countered. What's the real reason, Seo-jin? Silence filled the office. Seo-jin's hands were gripping the edge of her desk, knuckles white. Finally, she said quietly, almost a whisper, I'm scared. Min-jun's expression softened immediately. He asked gently, of what? Seo-jin looked away and said, of this, of us, of wanting something and losing it again, of opening myself up and being destroyed. I worked with Tae-hyun. I loved him. I trusted him completely. And he betrayed me in the worst way possible. He cheated with someone I mentored. He made me feel worthless. What if? Min-jun interrupted softly. What if I don't? He walked around the desk and sat in the chair across from her, maintaining some distance but staying close. He said, I can't promise I'll never hurt you. People hurt each other sometimes, even when they don't mean to. But I can promise you this, I will never betray you, I will never lie to you, and I will never ever make you feel small, because you make me want to be better, not for you, with you. There's a difference. Seo-jin wanted desperately to believe him, to take that leap, but the fear was paralyzing. She said, her voice breaking, I need time. Min-jun stood up and nodded. He said, take all the time you need, I'm not going anywhere. She said quietly, thank you for understanding. Min-jun smiled sadly and replied, I understand, but that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Then he left. After he was gone, Seo-jin sat down heavily in her chair. She put her head in her hands and finally let the tears fall. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans, because Seo-jin's carefully controlled world was about to explode. The next afternoon, Seo-jin was in a meeting when her assistant rushed in with an apologetic expression. There was someone in the lobby who insisted on seeing her immediately. When Seo-jin walked out to the lobby, her heart sank. Her mother, Mrs. Park, was standing there, her voice already raised. She was demanding to speak with her daughter, making a scene in front of the receptionist and several employees who had come to see what the commotion was about. The moment Seo-jin appeared, Mrs. Park's voice got even louder. There you are. We need to talk about this ridiculous situation. Seo-jin said quietly, firmly, Mother, this is my workplace. Please. But Mrs. Park cut her off, her voice carrying through the entire lobby. You've humiliated me enough. Divorced, running around with that young man, ignoring your responsibilities to Jaiwoo. My friends at church are asking questions. They're judging me because of your choices. The entire office had gone silent. Everyone was staring. Seo-jin's face went pale. She said firmly, that's enough. But Mrs. Park continued, Tae-hyun called me. He wants to reconcile. For Jaiwoo's sake, you should give him another chance instead of. Min-jun stepped forward. He'd been at his desk and heard the commotion. He said respectfully but firmly, Mrs. Park, I think it's best if you leave now. Mrs. Park turned on him, and who are you to tell me what to do? You're the reason my daughter has become the subject of gossip. Min-jun remained calm. He said, I'm someone who respects your daughter more than her ex-husband ever did. And right now, you're the one creating a scene. He gently gestured toward the door. Please, let's not make this worse. Mrs. Park, shocked that someone would stand up to her, looked around at all the watching faces. She turned back to Seo-jin and said coldly, You're making a mistake. Don't come crying to me when this ends badly. Then she stormed out. Seo-jin stood frozen, humiliated beyond words. The entire office had just witnessed her mother berating her. She couldn't even look at anyone. She just turned and walked back into her office, closing the door. News of the office scene reached Tae-hyun within hours. One of his employees had a friend at Seo-jin Architecture who told them everything. When Tae-hyun heard that Seo-jin was involved with someone and that he was younger, his reaction was immediate and intense. He'd never truly accepted that Seo-jin left him. In his mind, she'd overreacted, and she'd come crawling back eventually. The fact that she'd not only moved on but was successful and apparently happy enraged him. He showed up at Seo-jin Architecture the very next day. Tae-hyun strode past the receptionist straight to Seo-jin's office and opened the door without knocking. Seo-jin looked up from her computer, and her entire body tensed. She asked coldly, What are you doing here? Tae-hyun closed the door behind him and said with a mocking smile, "I heard an interesting rumor. Thought I'd come see if it was true." Seo-jin stood up and said firmly, "Whatever you heard, it's none of your business. We're divorced, remember." Tae-hyun laughed and walked closer to her desk. He said with disdain, "A boy, Seo-jin? Really? You left me for a boy?" Seo-jin's jaw clenched. She replied, "I left you because you cheated on me multiple times, and he's not a boy. He's more of a man than you ever were." The insult hit its mark. Tae-hyun's expression darkened. He said, "You think dating your employee makes you look good. People are laughing at you. They're saying you're desperate, that you're having a midlife crisis." Seo-jin walked around her desk to face him directly. She said, "Get out of my office." But Tae-hyun wasn't done. He continued, "What kind of example are you setting for Jae-woo, her mother running around with someone barely older than her?" At the mention of their daughter, Seo-jin's composure cracked slightly. Tae-hyun saw it and pressed harder. "Jae-woo deserves better than this. A stable home, 2 parents who act like adults." Before Seo-jin could respond, her office door opened. Min-jun walked in, having heard raised voices. He said calmly, "Is there a problem here?" Tae-hyun looked him up and down with obvious disdain. He said mockingly, "Ah, the boy toy. Tell me, what's it like dating your boss? Must be good for your career." Min-jun didn't rise to the bait. He simply said, "What's it like being so insecure that you have to show up at your ex-wife's workplace to feel important?" Tae-hyun's face flushed with anger. He stepped toward Min-jun, who didn't back down. Min-jun continued, his voice steady, "You're not welcome here. Seo-jin asked you to leave, so leave." Tae-hyun looked between them and laughed bitterly. He said to Seo-jin, "This is pathetic, but fine, have your fun. When it falls apart, and it will, don't expect sympathy from me." He started toward the door, then turned back with a cruel smile. He said, "By the way, I'm filing for custody of Jae-woo. You're clearly not providing a stable environment for our daughter. My lawyer will be in touch." Then he left. Seo-jin stood frozen, all the color drained from her face. Her ex-husband was threatening to take her daughter. The one thing she had left, the one person she'd fought so hard to protect, and it was because of her relationship with Min-jun. That evening, after everyone else had left, Seo-jin called Min-jun into her office. He came immediately, hoping they could finally talk properly. But the moment he saw her face, he knew something was wrong. Seo-jin said, not meeting his eyes, "We need to end this, whatever this is." Min-jun felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He asked, "Because of what Tae-hyun said?" Seo-jin replied, her voice flat, "Because he's right. I can't risk losing Jae-woo. I won't." Min-jun took a step closer. He said, "He's bluffing. He doesn't actually want custody. He wants to control you." But Seo-jin shook her head. She said, "You don't know him like I do. He'll do whatever it takes to win. And right now, he has ammunition. My relationship with you, my employee, 8 years younger. A judge might actually side with him." Min-jun's voice was desperate when he said, "So what? We just give up. We let him win." Seo-jin finally looked at him, and her eyes were filled with pain. She said, "I'm not giving up. I'm choosing my daughter, like I should have done from the start." Min-jun shook his head. He said, "This isn't choosing Jae-woo. This is letting fear make your decisions." Seo-jin's voice rose. "I'm her mother. I have to protect her." Min-jun replied, "Protect her from what? From seeing her mother happy, from seeing a relationship built on respect instead of betrayal." Seo-jin's composure finally cracked. She said, her voice breaking, "I can't do this again. I can't mix work and love and watch it destroy everything." Tears were forming in her eyes now. "Last time it destroyed my marriage, my partnership, my trust in people. I survived that barely. But if I lose Jae-woo, I won't survive that. I can't. She's all I have left." Min-jun moved closer, his own eyes now wet. He said softly, "I'm not Tae-hyun, and this isn't your past repeating. This is us. Our story, don't end it before it even begins." But Seo-jin stepped back, creating distance. She said firmly, coldly, "It's already ended. I'm sorry." Min-jun stood there for a long moment, searching her face for any sign that she didn't mean it. but her walls were back up, higher and stronger than ever. He finally nodded and said quietly, "If that's what you want." Then he left. After he was gone, Seo-jin collapsed into her chair and let herself cry for the first time in years. 2 days later, Tae-hyun's lawyer sent formal paperwork demanding a custody hearing. The letter cited Seo-jin's inappropriate relationship with an employee and unstable home environment as reasons Jae-woo should live with her father. When Seo-jin showed the letter to Jae-woo, explaining that her father wanted her to move in with him for a while, Jae-woo's reaction surprised her. The 17-year-old said, "Maybe that's good. Maybe I should live with Dad." Seo-jin felt her heart break. She asked why, and Jae-woo said, "You're always working, always stressed. Dad says you don't have time for me anymore." Seo-jin tried to explain, to tell her that wasn't true, but Jae-woo cut her off. She said, "I'm going to pack." The truth was, Jae-woo didn't fully understand why her parents had divorced. Tae-hyun had spent 5 years painting himself as the victim, telling their daughter that Seo-jin had overreacted, that marriages require compromise, that Seo-jin chose her career over family. And 17-year-old Jae-woo, missing her father and confused by the divorce, had believed him. So she moved into Tae-hyun's luxury apartment in Gangnam. The apartment felt unbearably empty without Jae-woo. Seo-jin threw herself into work, but the silence at home was deafening. The first week at her father's was wonderful. Tae-hyun took her shopping, bought her expensive gifts, took her to nice restaurants. He was attentive and fun, everything Jae-woo remembered from when she was younger. But by the second week, things started to change. Tae-hyun had a girlfriend named Yoo-jin, a 26-year-old model. When Tae-hyun was around, Yoo-jin was sweet to Jae-woo, complimenting her and asking about school. But when Tae-hyun left for work or took phone calls, Yoo-jin's mask slipped. She would make subtle comments about Jae-woo being in the way, or sigh dramatically when Jae-woo tried to talk to her. 2 weeks after Yoo-jin, she was gone. Tae-hyun brought home a different woman. This one, a finance executive, completely ignored Jae-woo's existence. She acted like Jae-woo was invisible. When Jae-woo tried to talk to her father about it, Tae-hyun brushed her off, saying the woman was just shy. That woman lasted 3 weeks before she was replaced by another. Jae-woo started to see a pattern. Her father brought home different women constantly, and none of them cared about her. Some were fake nice when Tae-hyun was around. Some were cold. Some pretended she didn't exist. But none of them were there for her, they were there for her father. And her father, he barely noticed. He was always on his phone, always at work functions, always prioritizing everything except his daughter. Meanwhile, at school, Jae-woo was dating a boy named Youngwoo. He was popular, handsome on the basketball team. All her friends were jealous. But lately, she'd noticed something that made her uncomfortable. Other girls would flirt with Youngwoo right in front of her, and he would flirt back. When Jae-woo confronted him about it, Youngwoo said the exact same thing her father used to say to her mother. "It doesn't mean anything. Don't be so insecure." He made her feel like she was overreacting, like she was being unreasonable for having feelings. One afternoon, Jae-woo left school early because she wasn't feeling well. When she walked past the gym, she saw Youngwoo with another girl, kissing her behind the bleachers. When he saw Jae-woo, he didn't even look guilty. He just said, "It's not what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. Jae-woo stood there, watching her boyfriend make excuses, watching the other girls smirk. And suddenly, she saw her father. The same casual dismissal of her feelings. The same expectation that she should just accept it. The same gaslighting that made her question her own reality. She realized in that moment that she'd chosen a boy exactly like her father. And she finally understood why her mother had left. That evening, Jae-woo came home to her father's apartment to find yet another new woman there. This one barely acknowledged Jae-woo's presence. Tae-hyun was on a business call, waving Jae-woo away when she tried to talk to him. The woman was scrolling through her phone, completely uninterested in anything but herself. Jae-woo went to her room, closed the door, and cried. She thought about her mother, about how Seo-jin had always been there, always made time despite her busy schedule. About how her mother had never made her feel invisible or unimportant. About how her mother had chosen to be alone rather than parade meaningless relationships in front of her daughter. She pulled out her phone and almost called her mother, but stopped. She'd been so awful to Seo-jin over the past few weeks, blaming her, choosing her father. How could she just call now and say she'd been wrong? Instead, Jae-woo made a different decision. She would go to her mother, face to face, the way difficult conversations should be had. The next day was Saturday. Tae-hyun had plans to play golf with clients. His latest girlfriend was going shopping. Jae-woo would be alone in the apartment again. She waited until they both left. Then she packed a small bag, just some clothes, her phone charger, and the bracelet her mother had given her for her 16th birthday. She left a note on the kitchen counter that just said, "Went out. We'll be back later." But she had no intention of coming back. Jae-woo took the subway across Seoul to her mother's office building. She knew Seo-jin often worked on Saturdays. When she arrived at Seo-jin Architecture, the building was mostly empty. She took the elevator to the top floor and found the office doors unlocked. She walked in quietly and saw her mother in her office through the glass walls, head bent over her computer, working as always. Jae-woo suddenly felt overwhelmed with emotion. She sank down into a chair near the elevators in a small alcove and just sat there. She didn't know how long she stayed there. Maybe an hour, maybe more. She just needed to be near her mother without having to explain everything yet. Finally, Seo-jin came out of her office to get something from the printer. She nearly walked right past the alcove. Then she stopped suddenly and turned back. She said, surprised, "Jae-woo, what are you doing here?" Jae-woo looked up at her mother, and all the walls she'd built crumbled. Her face crumpled, and she started to cry. Seo-jin immediately moved to her daughter, kneeling in front of her. She asked gently, concern filling her voice, "Sweetheart, what's wrong? Why are you here?" Through her tears, Jae-woo said, "I couldn't stay there anymore, Mom, I just couldn't." Seo-jin's heart broke. She said softly, okay, let's go somewhere we can talk, all right." Jae-woo nodded. Seo-jin took Jae-woo to a quiet cafe near the office, one that was never crowded on weekends. They sat in a corner booth, and Seo-jin ordered Jae-woo's favorite drink, a caramel latte, while she got tea for herself. For a few minutes, they just sat in silence, Jae-woo staring at her cup. Finally, Seo-jin said softly, "Do you want to tell me what happened?" And Jae-woo started talking. Everything poured out. She talked about living with her father, how exciting it had been at first, how he'd been attentive and fun. But then she described the parade of women. Yoojin, who was sweet in front of Tae-hyun but cruel when alone with Jae-woo. The finance executive who acted like Jae-woo was invisible. All the others whose names Jae-woo couldn't even remember anymore. She said, her voice breaking, "It's like a revolving door, Mom. Different women every few weeks. Some of them pretend to like me when Dad's around, then completely ignore me when he's not. Some don't even bother pretending, and Dad doesn't even notice. Or if he does, he doesn't care. I thought Dad wanted me there because he missed me, because he wanted to be my father. But I think he just wanted to win against you. I'm not his daughter to him. I'm just another thing he can use." Then Jae-woo talked about Young-woo, about the flirting with other girls, about the gaslighting, about catching him kissing someone else. She said, crying harder now, "He sounded just like Dad. When I tried to tell him how I felt, he said the exact same things Dad used to say to you. It doesn't mean anything. You're overreacting. Don't be so insecure." She looked up at her mother, with tears streaming down her face. "I chose a boy exactly like Dad, and I finally understand why you left. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry I didn't understand before. I'm sorry I blamed you. I'm sorry I made you feel guilty for choosing yourself. I'm sorry I took his side without even asking you what really happened." Seo-jin was crying now too. She reached across the table and took her daughter's hands. She said, "You have nothing to apologize for. You were a child when we divorced. You shouldn't have had to understand adult problems." Jae-woo shook her head. She said, "But I made it worse. I believed him when he said you overreacted, that you chose work over family. But that's not what happened, is it?" Seo-jin took a deep breath. She'd never told Jae-woo the full truth about why she left Tae-hyun. She'd thought protecting her daughter from the ugliness was the right thing to do, but maybe it was time for honesty. She said, "Your father cheated on me, multiple times. The first time I found out, he apologized and promised it would never happen again. I believed him because I wanted our family to stay together for you. The second time, he said I was being paranoid. He made me feel crazy for being hurt. The third time, I caught him in his office with a woman I had mentored, someone I'd helped build her career, and he looked at me like I was the problem, like I was overreacting. Like my feelings didn't matter." She continued, her voice steady despite the tears. "I didn't leave because I chose work over family. I left because staying would have destroyed me, and I couldn't be a good mother to you if I was broken. I couldn't teach you self-respect if I had none myself. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from your father's behavior sooner. I wanted you to have a relationship with him. I thought I could shield you from the worst of it. I was wrong." Jae-woo shook her head and said, "You were trying to be a good mom. You were trying to do what was right." Then she said quietly, "I don't want to be with Youngwoo anymore. I don't want to be with anyone who makes me feel small. I want to find someone who treats me like how that man at your office looks at you." Seo-jin's breath caught. She asked, "What do you mean?" Jae-woo managed a small smile through her tears. She said, "Min-jun, that's his name, right? I saw him once when I came to pick up some papers. The way he looked at you when you weren't watching. Like you were the most important person in the world. That's what I want someday." Seo-jin's eyes filled with fresh tears. She'd pushed Min-jun away to protect Jae-woo. But maybe protecting Jae-woo didn't mean sacrificing her own happiness. Maybe it meant showing her daughter what real love looked like. Jae-woo said, "Mom, I don't want you to be alone just because you're afraid. I want you to be happy. And if Min-jun makes you happy, then I'm okay with it. More than okay. You deserve someone who looks at you like that. You deserve to be loved the way you love other people." Seo-jin pulled her daughter into a hug, both of them crying now. She said into Jae-woo's hair, "When did you get so wise?" Jae-woo laughed wetly and replied, "I learned from the best." They stayed like that for a long time, healing years of hurt and misunderstanding with honesty and tears. Finally, Seo-jin pulled back and asked, "Are you ready to go home, our home?" Jae-woo nodded, smiling through her tears. "Yes, please." Seo-jin took out her phone and said, "I should call your father, he's probably worried." But when she dialed Tae-hyun's number, it rang and rang with no answer. They went back to Seo-jin's apartment together, their home. For the first time in weeks, it felt complete. Jae-woo looked around the familiar space and said, "I missed this place, I missed you." Seo-jin wrapped her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "I missed you too, sweetheart, so much." It wasn't until 2 hours later that Tae-hyun finally called. His voice was frantic when Seo-jin answered. He said, "Where's Jae-woo? She left a note saying she went out, but she's not answering her phone. It's been hours." Seo-jin's voice was calm, almost cold. She said, "She's with me." Tae-hyun's tone immediately changed from worried to angry. He demanded, "What? You can't just take her without telling me." Seo-jin replied evenly, "I didn't take her. She came to me. Because she couldn't stand living with you and your parade of girlfriends anymore. Because she felt invisible and unwanted. Just like I did when we were married." There was silence on the other end. Then Tae-hyun said, "That's ridiculous. Jae-woo was fine here." Seo-jin's voice hardened. She said, "She wasn't fine, Tae-hyun. She watched you bring home different women every few weeks. Some were cruel to her. Some ignored her. All of them cared more about you than about your daughter. And you were too busy with work and golf and your own ego to even notice." Tae-hyun started to argue, but Seo-jin cut him off. "Jae-woo chose to come home, where she belongs. If you want to see her, you can arrange visitation like we've been doing. But she's not living with you." Tae-hyun threatened, "I'll take this to court. I'll fight you for custody." Seo-jin said calmly, "Go ahead. Jae-woo is 17, old enough for the court to consider her wishes. And she'll tell them exactly what she told me today, about the revolving door of women, about you ignoring her, about you using her as a pawn against me. So please, Tae-hyun, take it to court. I'd love to see how that works out for you. She paused, then said with finality, You lost, Tae-hyun, not because of me, because of you, goodbye. Then she hung up. Jae-woo, who'd been listening from her room, came out and hugged her mother. She said, Thank you for standing up for me. Seo-jin hugged her back and replied, Always. That night, after Jae-woo had gone to bed, Seo-jin sat alone in her living room with a cup of tea. For the first time in weeks, she let herself think about Min-jun, about how she'd pushed him away, about the hurt in his eyes when she'd ended things. She'd told herself she was protecting Jae-woo, but today, Jae-woo had told her she wanted her mother to be happy. Seo-jin realized she'd been so afraid of repeating the past that she'd been sabotaging her future. Min-jun wasn't Tae-hyun. Their relationship wasn't her marriage, and she'd let fear make her decisions instead of hope. She'd let her trauma control her instead of learning from it. Do-yeon had been right. She'd been making excuses. The age gap, the workplace dynamic, the potential gossip, those were all just shields to protect her heart. But hearts that are protected too well never get to feel anything at all. And she wanted to feel. She wanted to take the risk. She wanted him. The next morning, Seo-jin woke up early and made Jae-woo breakfast, fluffy pancakes like she used to make when Jae-woo was little. When Jae-woo came into the kitchen and saw them, she smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. I missed these, Jae-woo said. Over breakfast, Seo-jin said, I need to do something today, something I should have done weeks ago. Jae-woo raised an eyebrow and asked what. Seo-jin took a breath and said, I need to talk to Min-jun, to apologize, to tell him I was wrong. Jae-woo grinned and said, Good, because he seems really nice, Mom, and you deserve someone nice. Someone who makes you smile like you used to. Seo-jin reached across and squeezed her daughter's hand. She said, Thank you for understanding. Jae-woo squeezed back and replied, Thank you for showing me what self-respect looks like, what strength looks like. After breakfast, Seo-jin drove to Min-jun's apartment in Mapogu. She'd never been there before, but she remembered the address from his employee file. It was a modest building, nothing fancy, which somehow made sense for him. He'd never been interested in status or luxury. She stood outside his door for a full minute before gathering the courage to knock. When he opened it, the surprise on his face was clear. He was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair messy like he'd just woken up. He said simply, Seo-jin. She said quickly, before she lost her nerve, Can I come in? I need to talk to you. Min-jun stepped aside immediately, letting her into his small but tidy apartment. They stood in his living room, an awkward silence between them. Finally, Seo-jin started talking. She said, I'm sorry for ending things the way I did, for pushing you away, for letting fear control me. I told myself I was protecting Jae-woo, but the truth is I was protecting myself from getting hurt again, from taking a risk, from being happy, from believing that I deserved to be loved. Min-jun was quiet, just listening. His expression was guarded, but there was hope in his eyes. Seo-jin continued, looking up at him now. You were right. I was letting my past dictate my future. I was so afraid of repeating what happened with Tae-hyun that I couldn't see that you're nothing like him, that what we have is nothing like that. You respect me. You see me. You make me want to be brave. She smiled through the tears forming in her eyes. My daughter came back to me, and she told me she wanted me to be happy. Min-jun's voice was rough when he asked, What changed? Seo-jin smiled and said, Jae-woo. She told me she'd rather see me with someone who respects me than see me alone. She told me I deserved to be happy, and I realized she was right. I've spent 5 years building walls, protecting myself, refusing to be vulnerable. But those walls were also keeping out everything good, including you. Min-jun said softly, Are you sure? Because I can't do this halfway, Seo-jin. I can't be with you if you're going to run every time something gets hard. I need to know you're all in. Seo-jin nodded firmly. She said, I'm sure. I can't promise I won't get scared sometimes. I can't promise I won't have moments of doubt. Old fears don't disappear overnight. But I promise I won't run. I promise I'll talk to you instead of pushing you away. I promise I'll try. I promise I'll choose us every day, even when it's hard. She took a step closer to him. I don't care what people say anymore. I don't care about the gossip or the judgment. I choose you. I choose us. Minjun closed the distance between them. He said, "That's all I need, you trying." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. He asked, "So what now?" Seojin smiled and said, "No, I stopped being afraid. Now I choose us." Then she kissed him. This kiss was different from the desperate, passionate one in her office. This one was softer, deeper, filled with promise and hope. It was a beginning, not just a moment of weakness. When they pulled apart, Minjun rested his forehead against hers. He said, "I missed you, every day, every moment." Seojin laughed wetly and replied, "I missed you too, even though I was the idiot who left." Minjun smiled and said, "Lucky for you, I'm very forgiving." She kissed him again, longer this time, and whispered against his lips, "I love you. I should have said it before. I was too scared. But I'm saying it now. I love you." Minjun pulled her closer and said, "I've been choosing you since the day I met you, and I'll keep choosing you, every day." They stayed like that for a while, just holding each other, both of them finally letting themselves believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work. 6 months had passed since that difficult weekend. Seojin Architecture had just won the most prestigious award in Korean architecture, the Grand Prize for Innovation. The ceremony was held at a luxury hotel in Seoul, filled with industry professionals, clients, and press. Seojin stood on stage giving her acceptance speech. She talked about vision, perseverance, and the importance of surrounding yourself with talented people who challenge you to be better. When she mentioned her team, she looked directly at Minjun in the audience and smiled. He smiled back, pride radiating from his face. Their relationship was no longer a secret. They'd stopped hiding months ago. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Seojin worked the room with her usual grace, shaking hands and networking. Minjun was by her side, not as her subordinate but as her partner. They moved through the crowd together, and people who had whispered months ago now treated them with respect. Success has a way of silencing critics. Do-yeon approached them with champagne glasses and said with a wink, "To the power couple of Seoul architecture, I told you he was good for you." Seojin laughed and replied, "You were right, as usual." Minjun raised his glass and said, "Thank you for believing in me, both professionally and personally." Do-yeon clinked her glass against theirs and said, "Just remember to invite me to the wedding." Seojin nearly choked on her champagne, while Minjun just grinned. Across the room, Jae-woo arrived, looking beautiful in a simple black dress, her hair styled elegantly. She'd asked if she could come to support her mother, and Seojin had been thrilled. Jae-woo looked confident, mature, healed. She'd broken up with Youngwoo months ago and was now focusing on herself, on school, on figuring out who she wanted to be. When Jae-woo reached her mother, Seojin pulled her into a hug. She said, "Thank you for being here. This means everything." Jae-woo smiled and replied, "Where else would I be? My mom just won the biggest award in architecture." Then she turned to Minjun and said playfully, "Congratulations, Oppa, you must be proud." The word Oppa, a Korean term of endearment, made Seojin's heart swell. Over the past 6 months, Minjun and Jae-woo had built their own relationship. He never tried to replace her father, but he was present. He helped her with school projects, listened when she needed to talk about college applications or friend drama, and treated her with the respect she deserved. He showed up, consistently, reliably, the way a father should. Minjun ruffled Jae-woo's hair gently and said, "Very proud. Your mom worked incredibly hard for this." Jae-woo grinned and said, "I know, she always does. That's why I admire her so much." Later in the evening, Minjun pulled Seojin away from the crowd to a quiet balcony overlooking the Seoul skyline. The city lights sparkled below them, and the spring air was cool and refreshing. Seojin leaned against the railing and sighed contentedly. She said, "This is nice. I was getting overwhelmed in there. Too many people wanting to talk business." Minjun stood beside her and said, "You were brilliant tonight. The speech, the networking, all of it. You commanded that room." Seojin turned to look at him and replied, "We were brilliant. This award isn't just mine. It's ours, the team's, yours." Minjun took her hand and said, "I'm proud of you, not just for the award, for everything, for standing up to your mother, for setting boundaries with Taehyun, for choosing yourself, for choosing us." Seojin squeezed his hand and said softly, "I couldn't have done it without you. You gave me the courage to be brave, to believe I deserved happiness." Minjun shook his head. He said, "No, you've always been brave. You rebuilt your entire life from scratch. You left a toxic marriage. You started a company. You raised an incredible daughter. You just needed to remember how strong you already were." He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her waist. Seojin rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. She said quietly, "A year ago, I never would have imagined this, being here, being happy, being with you, believing in love again." Minjun kissed the top of her head and replied, "A year ago, I was just hoping you'd notice me." Seojin laughed and looked up at him. She said, "I noticed. I just fought you, fought myself." Minjun smiled and said, "And now?" Seojin stood on her tiptoes and kissed him softly. She said against his lips, "Now I'm done fighting. Now I'm just living, finally." They stayed like that for a while, wrapped in each other, the city lights twinkling around them like stars. The reception eventually wound down, and Seojin, Minjun, and Jaiwoo left together. They went to a small late-night cafe that Jaiwoo loved, the kind of place with cozy booths and comfort food. It was nearly midnight, but none of them wanted the night to end. They ordered tteokbokki, fried chicken, and hot chocolate, indulgent food that tasted even better after a formal event. Jaiwoo told them about the college applications she'd been working on, her eyes bright with excitement about the future. She'd decided she wanted to study psychology, wanting to understand people and help them navigate difficult emotions. "I think I'd be good at it," she said, "after everything we've been through." Seojin listened with pride, occasionally offering advice, her heart full watching her daughter so animated and hopeful. Minjun asked thoughtful questions that showed he genuinely cared about Jaiwoo's dreams. At one point, Jaiwoo said, "You know, I'm glad things turned out this way. I mean, I wish Dad wasn't the way he is. But I'm glad you found Minjun, Mom." She continued, "And I'm glad I get to see what a good relationship actually looks like, what respect looks like, what partnership looks like. It's teaching me what to look for, what to never settle for." She grinned and added, "Even if you two are disgustingly cute sometimes." Seojin's eyes filled with tears. She reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. She said, "That means everything to me, you know that." Jaiwoo nodded and replied, "I know, and for what it's worth, I think you two are really good together." As they finished eating and prepared to leave, Jaiwoo said she was going to meet up with some friends who were studying at a nearby library. College entrance exams were coming up. Seojin asked if she'd be home by curfew, and Jaiwoo rolled her eyes affectionately and said, "Yes, Mom, I'll be home by 11. Before she left, Jaiwoo hugged her mother tight, then surprised Minjun by hugging him too. She said quietly, "Thank you for making her happy, for showing me what a good man looks like." Minjun hugged her back and replied, "Thank you for giving us your blessing. It matters more than you know. You're an incredible person, Jaiwoo. Your mom raised you well." After Jaiwoo left, Seojin and Minjun walked slowly back to the car. The night air was cool, the streets relatively quiet. Seojin said, "She really likes you, you know, she trusts you. That's huge for her after everything with her father." Minjun smiled and said, "I really like her too. She's smart, funny, resilient, has a good heart, just like her mother." Seojin stopped walking and turned to face him. The street was quiet, lit by soft street lamps. She said, "I never thought I'd have this. A partner who respects me, a daughter who understands me, peace, actual real peace." Minjun cupped her face gently and said, "You deserve all of it and more. You always did. You just had to believe it." Seojin whispered, "I love you. I don't think I say it enough." Minjun's smile was radiant. He said, "I love you too, and you can say it as many times as you want. I'll never get tired of hearing it." They kissed under the streetlight, not caring if anyone saw, not worried about gossip or judgment. Just two people who had found each other against the odds, who had fought through fear and doubt to get to this moment. The final scene showed Seo-jin and Min-jun at the office on a Monday morning, a few days after the award ceremony. The trophy sat on the shelf in Seo-jin's office, catching the morning light. They were reviewing blueprints for a new project, heads bent together, discussing ideas and making notes. The office hummed with productive energy, people working hard, the gossip long since replaced by respect for what Seo-jin and Min-jun had built together. At one point, Min-jun made a suggestion about the design, and Seo-jin considered it, then nodded and made the change. They worked seamlessly, the way they always had, but now without the weight of secrets or fear. Their relationship had only made them stronger, both personally and professionally. As the morning sun streamed through the windows, Seo-jin looked around her office, at the award, at the blueprints, at Min-jun beside her, and felt something she hadn't felt in years: complete contentment. She thought back to a year ago, when she'd been so closed off, so afraid, so convinced that she'd never open her heart again. She thought about all the obstacles they'd faced. The age gap concerns, the workplace dynamics, her mother's judgment, Tae-hyun's interference, her own crippling fear of being hurt again. None of it had been easy, but all of it had been worth it, every tear, every doubt, every moment of fear. Because on the other side of fear was this: love, partnership, happiness. Min-jun noticed her thoughtful expression and asked, "What are you thinking about?" Seo-jin smiled and said, "How different everything is now, how different I am. I used to think strength meant protecting yourself, building walls, never letting anyone in." She looked at him, this man who had seen through her walls, who had been patient when she was difficult, who had loved her despite every reason she gave him not to. She continued, "But now I know that real strength is being vulnerable enough to let someone see you, all of you, even the broken parts, especially the broken parts." Min-jun reached across the desk and took her hand. He said, "For what it's worth, I've always seen you, and I've always thought you were extraordinary, from the very first day." Seo-jin squeezed his hand and replied, "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." Min-jun brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. He said, "Never. I told you from the beginning I'm not going anywhere." As they returned to their work, the morning continued. Two professionals at the top of their field, two partners building something beautiful together, two people who had chosen love over fear. The Seoul skyline was visible through the windows, the morning light making everything look hopeful and new. Seo-jin had spent years building walls around her heart, convinced that protection was the same as strength. She told herself that love was a risk she couldn't afford to take. But Min-jun had shown her something different. He'd shown her that love doesn't have to destroy you. That vulnerability isn't weakness. That choosing happiness isn't selfish. The age gap that had seemed so insurmountable became irrelevant. The workplace concerns faded. The gossip eventually died down. Jae-woo learned from her mother's example that self-respect matters more than keeping up appearances. That it's better to be alone than with someone who makes you feel small. That love should add to your life, not subtract from it. In the end, this wasn't just a story about an older woman and a younger man defying expectations. It was a story about courage, about choosing yourself, about believing that you deserve love, respect, and happiness, no matter what mistakes you've made or how many times you've been hurt. It was about second chances, and taking them. Seo-jin used to think her story was over after her divorce, that she'd had her chance at love and lost it, that the best years of her life were behind her, but she was wrong. Her story wasn't over. It was just beginning.